Grand prize. Yo, yo, over to you, my man. Cheers, guys.
I have never been introduced like that. Excuse me. Just let me stick this on. Okay. My goodness. What a fantastic place. What a fantastic audience. I'm so looking forward to spending an hour telling you about some amazing things. And you are already a very special audience. A bit closer. You're already a special audience, right? Because you come here to find out how to strengthen your mindset, and that makes you exceptional already to me. I've taught what I'm going to tell you. I've taught to probably tens of thousands of people over a number of years, and I look forward to passing it on to you. I feel really privileged that you're here, and I can talk to you, and I've got you for an hour, and I know what I'm going to tell you. And this is life-changing stuff. Okay, so you're in the right place if that's what you want to do. And you're in the right place if you want to become stronger. Now, you're probably thinking, changing mindset, okay, developing a powerful mindset, that's all about power. What I'm going to tell you is not just about power, I'm going to tell you quite a bit about resilience as well. Why? Because to develop a powerful mindset, you also need to know how to be incredibly resilient. And so I'm going to talk about both those things. Now, I can tell you that what I'm going to tell you today is an introduction to how I massively changed my life around about my mid-20s. I wasn't very impressed with myself or my life up until that point. I wasn't terribly confident. I'd had difficulties as one does as a teenager. And I was now in my mid-20s, and I was incredibly lucky. You know, I kind of think life is a lot about luck if it's not all about luck, because you might say, oh no, it's not about luck, it's about what you do and what you make of life. And I say, yeah, but if you're the sort of person who can do that, you're very lucky. So I think it's a lot about luck, and I was incredibly lucky in my mid-20s. I met a guy, in fact 2 or 3 people who were amazing and who shared with me what they knew. One of them, the first person actually, the first thing I'm going to tell you is something that was shared with me by a guy who was a senior executive in a company I was working for. He later became the chief executive of the world's largest company. So that gives you an idea of how he was incredibly resilient, incredibly powerful. And he shared some amazing stuff with me because I'd done him a bit of a favor and he repaid it. Okay, so let me start talking about resilience. So think about it. Why are some people incredibly resilient and why are some people less resilient? Why do some people struggle with life, struggle with the events that happen to them, suffer a bit from this or that, or suffer a lot from this or that? And some people just take life incredibly coolly and are able to handle setbacks, they're able to handle negatives in life. What's the difference between those people? And I can tell you it's a great deal about acceptance, and I'm going to tell you some things about acceptance which will surprise you. But before I do, I want to tell you a little story. Okay, I was giving a training like this in a hotel, and I had to go to the gents, so apologies because this story happens in the gents. I was making myself comfortable on one of those little seats as one does, and something rather strange happened. I'll let your minds run a little bit at the moment as to think what that might be. But the strange thing that happened was there was a guy in the cubicle next to me started talking to me. He said, "How you going, mate?" And he had an Australian accent, so I thought maybe this is what they do in Australia. You know, a weird thing, talk to each other in adjacent cubicles. And so I thought I'd better answer him. He was stranger they were. I said, "I'm going fine. Thank you very much for asking." And then he said, "Tell me," I've just lost the mic. No, it's come back. "Tell me," he said, "how's life treating you?" I thought I'd already answered that question. And I thought this was getting a bit weird because he clearly wanted to get into a conversation which I didn't particularly want to. And so I said, "Life's treating me fine. Thanks very much for asking." And then he said, "Tell me," he said, "what are you doing right now?" I realized he was probably talking about my life, okay, because that was the theme of his questions. But I thought I'd answer him literally. So I said, "Look, quite probably I'm doing exactly the same as you are." And then the next thing I heard him say was, "Hang on, mate, I'll have to call you back. There's some idiot in the next cubicle keeps answering all my questions." So now you might think I felt a little bit embarrassed or a little bit, put off by that, but I didn't. I smiled and I kind of enjoyed the moment. And that's what I do practically all the time in my life because I'm a pretty resilient guy, and that's what I want to make you, incredibly resilient. Okay, so resilience is largely about acceptance. So you might think, okay, so acceptance, that doesn't sound like a very powerful concept. Because in our culture and in our language, we kind of see acceptance as rather a weak concept, because we kind of think it means just letting things be, okay? So if I said, something's happened, accept it, or you're in a certain situation in your life, accept it, you think, no, I don't want to accept it, I want to fix it, I want to make things better. And in fact, you probably heard of this thing called the Serenity Creed, that says, accept the things you can't change the things you can change. I'm sure you've all heard of that. And I came across it early in my 20s, and very quickly I thought initially, that sounds sensible. You probably think that's sensible, accept the things you can't change the things you can change. I started trying to apply it to my life, and I found it, for me, not necessarily for everyone, it was a totally useless piece of wisdom. It did nothing for me at all. Why? Because every time I had an issue about anything or a problem with anything, I wanted to do something about it and fix it. And in fact, I always thought I could do something about every problem or that I ever had. And so this thing about accept the things you can't change didn't really apply to me. The weather, can't change the weather, okay? I grew up in England, didn't never concern me. What else can't you change? I couldn't think of much else that I couldn't do something about. Does that make sense? You might think there are a few things. Some people, of course, have a lot that they need to accept. If they're born with problems or got medical problems or whatever, they need to accept things if they're not curable. But I didn't have anything like that. So I dropped it, forgot about it. And then sometime later, this amazing guy who was probably the most resilient and powerful person I've ever met, the CEO of the company I was working for, he told me one day that I was crazy. But then he told me that I wasn't the only one. He said everyone's crazy. And I'm pretty sure that everyone in this room, by the definition I'm about to give you, is probably crazy. So I'm going to tell you why, and then you won't be quite as offended as you might feel now by me telling you crazy. But I was certainly crazy, and he told me why. He said, you're crazy because there are two things in life you can never change, and you're wanting them to be different all the time. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Two things in life you can never, ever change, but people always want them to be different. Does anyone have any idea what either of those two things might be? No, I don't want time. The time? No, I'm perfectly happy with that. It's 7:45. And no, I don't think it's about time. A little bit about time. Anyone else think what the two things might be that you can never change, but people want to be different all the time? The past is one of them. What would the other one be? No, you can change the future, surely. The present moment, okay? The present moment. Two things you can never change, the past and the present moment. About the present moment, by the way, you might think, oh, yeah, sure, I can change that. But you can only change it in the future. You can never undo what already is. Does that make sense? And here's the point. What he explained to me. He said about 90% of all negative thoughts involve wanting one of those two things to be different. If you're having a negative thought, you're almost always either wanting something that's happened not to have happened, or you're wanting a situation that exists right now not to exist right now. The only things that don't fall into those two categories is worry about the future, wanting the future to be different in some way that we think we might be, and we generally call that worry. So if you exclude worry, every negative thought you ever have involves wanting something to be different that cannot possibly be different. So, when I was in that cubicle and the guy had inflicted this little bit of potential embarrassment on me, I automatically accepted what is. I learned to accept what is many, many years ago. I never have negative thoughts about anything. I've almost forgotten how to. So let me develop this a bit for you so that you can understand how you can achieve that. First of all, let me put this up. There's the familiar wisdom on acceptance, okay, that for me wasn't going to do anything for me at all. We call wanting the past or present to be different resisting what was or resisting what is. In fact, resistance is a word we psychologists use for either having negative thoughts about something or wanting something to be different. And if you think about it, having a negative thought about something is the same as wanting something to be different. If you think through any negative thoughts you ever had, you basically want something. You either want something that's happened not to have happened, or you want a situation that exists to be different, or you want the future to be different if you're worrying. Okay, so Here's some basic examples. I'm going to get through this pretty quickly, so I'm not going to put things up one point at a time. I'm going to shoot through this stuff. So I'll let you read those things, and those are examples of wanting either the past or the present to be different. And let me tell you, about 95% of negative thoughts are on the screen. Because if you think about it, almost any negative thought you ever have is either involves regretting the past, being dissatisfied with the present, wishing something was different right now, or complaining about other people. It's all unproductive complaining. There's productive complaining, of course, but most complaining is unproductive. You might want to think, does almost every negative thought you ever have fall on one of those points in the screen? I would say that's pretty darn close. Okay, those are pretty general points, and they probably cover most of the things you ever think about in a negative way. Just hold with me a minute while I... Okay. So, what's the opposite of resisting what is, do you think? What would we call it? Accepting what is. Okay? So, I was introduced to the concept of accepting what is the first time in my mid-20s, and I was amazed by what I was finding out. Okay, so accepting what is basically means accept the past or the present moment. Does that make sense? In other words, stop wishing things were already different. I can tell you that the average person in both the UK and probably around the world has between 20 and 50 of those kind of thoughts every day. Resistant thought. Between 20 and 50 in the tests we've done, between 20 and 50 resistant thoughts a day. I call them crazy thoughts for the reason that I've told you. So if you're a normal person, you're probably having something in that range every day, and every single one of those thoughts is crazy. Does that make sense from what I've already told you? Okay. So let's move on. So here's a what-if question for you. What do you think life would be like if you could accept what is all the time? Oh, and accept what will be to get rid of worry. I'm not going to talk about worry today. I don't have time to talk about everything, but if you come back and hear me doing another talk, you'll find out how we eliminate worry. I'm going to tell you today how I went some way towards eliminating resisting what is and learn to accept what is all the time. And what if having accepted what is, in other words, eliminated negative thoughts about the past or the present, all I have to do to be more powerful is focus on action to improve the future. Does that make sense? With me so far? Okay. So what if you also have some powerful tools to make the future whatever you want it to be? What if you have some powerful tools to create whatever future you want? I'm going to start talking about that today. I can't tell you all the tools, but I'll tell you some very powerful ones that will enable you to do more of that. And what if you could deal easily and effectively with challenges in relationships? Why have I got those three things on the screen? Because I believe if you have those three things embedded in your life, you are going to have an amazing life. There's nothing else you need. Apologies to those of you who are religious. That's not included up here, so that would be a fourth one for those who are religious. But for those who aren't, that's all you need to have an amazing life. I'm sorry? You can't see. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah, okay, sorry about that. So what if we could accept what is all the time, have some powerful tools to change or achieve whatever you want to change or achieve, deal easily and effectively with challenges in relationships. Okay? All right. And that's what this training, the full training, I can't cover all those things today, but that's what the full training covers. Okay. Oh, sorry, there was a question there. The question was, might life be different? What do you think? Do you think life might be different if you could do all of that, all of the time? It is true. Take it from me. If you haven't mastered all this, which I imagine you haven't, life is incredibly different. It is unrecognizably different. And it took me about 6 months to achieve all of this, and my life changed so dramatically. It's been pretty amazing ever since. Okay, so what did we do? I was interested in this. By the way, this guy who told me about it was so impressive. He was incredibly resilient. He never seemed to ever have a negative thought. He handled everything. He was the CEO of Australia's largest company at the time that I knew him, before he became the CEO of the world's largest company. And he just seemed to be an amazing guy. Very resilient, very powerful, very together, all the things that you expect, very successful. and very with it people to be. So I kind of thought, well, my God, wouldn't it be rather neat to try and be more like this guy? I thought, why not? You know, at the time my life was pretty poor, frankly. I was very unconfident. You know, my life was not very impressive in many ways. I don't want to go into it. I don't want you crying because it improved pretty damn quickly. So I thought, yeah, it would be neat. So I got 2 colleagues together in the company I was working for and told them what I'd found out, told them everything I've told you so far. And they got interested, and together we thought, yeah, would it be kind of neat if we could teach ourselves to be more like him? And we started off on the resilience. I'll tell you about the power stuff later. So we developed something, a technique to train ourselves to accept what is all the time. And we succeeded in a number of months. Okay, so we call this technique positive acceptance. It's a 4-step process. I'm going to go through it really quickly. We figured that if we needed to change our thinking from one of resistance to one of acceptance, we needed to create a habit of noticing when we were in resistance. Does that make sense? Oh, by the way, I counted how many times I was in resistance for one day. 24. 24 times I was having resistant thoughts, crazy thoughts. Well, I can tell you right now, by the way, in case you're concerned about having between 20 and 40 crazy thoughts a day, let me just tell you that not that long ago we watched EastEnders for 10 minutes. And we counted 87 resistant thoughts in 10 minutes. That's 1 every 7 seconds on average. So dividing that by 2, because most of it was interactions between 2 people, and multiplying it up to 16 hours, the average EastEnders character, check that again, has 4,000 resistant thoughts per day. That's 4,000, now you know, crazy thoughts per day. So if you count yours and find you're up in about 40 to 50 or something like that, don't worry. 4,000 is the worst it can get. Okay, so we thought, yeah, does that make sense? We ought to kind of create a habit of noticing when we're resisting what is, having a negative thought about something. Okay, the second step was to acknowledge, it says here, recognize we're wishing for the impossible. I changed that for myself. You don't have to do this, but I changed that second step to recognize I was having a crazy thought. Is that okay? Yeah? So that was the second step of this process. The third step was to drop the thought. That might surprise you, that you can just drop a negative thought. How on earth can you do that? It's like somebody coming up to you and saying, stop thinking negatively, think positively. I can tell you that that is not terribly helpful. However, this works for the simple reason that we've recognized these 2 things. I can tell you it's much easier to drop a crazy thought if you've already acknowledged it's crazy. So I'm going to suggest you try this out, by the way. I'm not just telling you this for the sake of it. I want you to go away and try it out. And the 4th step was to refocus on what we can do, if anything, to improve the future. Does that all make sense to you as a process to try and train ourselves to accept what is? The first 3 steps lead you to accepting what is. The 4th step is action. We call this positive acceptance. So positive acceptance is actually a combination of 2 things. Accepting what is, first 3 steps, and taking action to improve the future. That makes it quite different from acceptance. When I started training this, I found the term positive acceptance to be kind of long-winded. You know, especially when used as a verb, to positively accept this or positively accept that. So we changed the name. We took the P out of positive, stuck it on the front of acceptance, and created a new word. Sorry if you don't think we should create new words, but we did. And we created the word Paxceptance. So Paxceptance is basically about this. Okay? Drop the negative thought, accept what is, refocus on action. Very different from acceptance. In fact, I can give you an example. Somebody came up to me once and having done this little 1-hour seminar and was coming on to another one, and she said, I love your positive acceptance. I've been using it. Everyone says this, by the way. I've been using it and it's fantastic, but I really don't like that word you created. I really don't like Paxceptance. I don't know. I never found out why she didn't like it, but she didn't. What do you think I said to her? No. I said you need to Paxcept it. Okay? Because it exists, and what you're doing is wishing that something doesn't exist that does exist. Does that make sense? And then I said to her, not only do you need to Paxcept it, but she, by the way, was amused. Fortunately, she wasn't put down. So as well as Paxcepting it, I said you also need to accept it. Think about it. So now I'm getting into the difference between Paxceptance and acceptance. So Paxceptance, remember, is a combination of accepting what is and sometimes taking action to change the future. In her case, it was just accepting what is. Does that make sense? So why would I also say to her, you need to accept it? Remember what acceptance means. Acceptance means letting things be. not trying to change them. Acceptance is future-oriented, because acceptance is about distinguishing between can I change it or can't I change it, and that's always about the next moment of the future, is it not? So acceptance is a future-oriented concept. Acceptance is about the past and the present. They're very different concepts. So what did I mean by you need to accept it? What I meant was, you are not going to persuade me to change it, so you might as well not try. It's been around for many years. There are thousands of people out there using acceptance all the time in their lives. I'm not going to take the word away. So does that make sense to you? The difference between acceptance and acceptance? I suggested you accept it as well. Okay.
Super quick cue. Don't forget the Facebook Live's £200 chance to win. Just in case.
Right. Yes. Okay. So, so now that brings us to the end of my talk about the bit of talk about acceptance. This is the principle we came up with. That summarizes everything I've told you so far. I'll let you read. Oh no, I better read it out for the guys over here. So it says, what is. There's no point wishing that what is isn't. That's the acceptance bit. But if we want to change the future, we won't do it by wishing. We need to act. That's the last bit of the acceptance process. So, are you with it? Are you okay? What acceptance is about? I suggest you go away and try it out. All right. Now, I was getting pretty good at this. Let me give you an example, okay? So, I was heading for a very important meeting about a month after I got into this. And why was it important? There were about 30 people there, a lot of them very senior people in my company. It was my meeting. In other words, I was doing the presentation, and it was a major, major topic and very important to the company. And I was sitting in my car in the most horrendous traffic jam imaginable. There is no way I was going to get to that meeting until at least an hour or more after it was due to start. What do you think I was thinking? Was I having some pretty negative thoughts? Yes. The main one was probably what an idiot I was for not leaving more contingency. Does that make sense? This was a vitally important meeting. Stuck in a traffic jam. I had no contingency. I should have had at least an hour or two of contingency for such an important meeting, and I didn't. So I was having negative thoughts. Those lasted about 10 seconds, maybe 15, when I realized what I was doing. What was I doing? Massively resisting what is. Does that make sense? Okay, so I immediately brought in the process that I've described to you. Just let go. Realize this was crazy. To be resisting what is totally crazy. Does it make sense? It just... apart from being crazy, it achieves nothing. Are you with me? It achieves nothing to want the present moment or the past to be different. So I was chastising myself for not leaving earlier. That was the past. I was really unhappy about the present, the situation I was in. All pointless, all useless, brought in the positive acceptance, let go of it, and took action to change the future. The first thing I managed to do was get a message to the meeting, and that was mildly helpful, not hugely. But I did something else much more influential, much more powerful. I made a commitment to myself. This will never, ever happen again in my lifetime. Since then, I have always left masses of contingency for important meetings. If I'm giving a conference talk somewhere, I will be there a long time before the talk starts. If I'm going overseas for a training or something, I'll fly the previous day and stay in a hotel. I will never, ever risk being late for an important meeting. I'm not saying I'm not going to be late for meeting you for lunch, okay? I might be. But for an important meeting, I will not risk it. I build heaps of contingency in, and that was a learning I got from that rather awful experience. By the way, it wasn't as tragic as I imagined it was going to be. There were some senior people stuck in that traffic jam, thank God. And so the whole thing was a bit of a disaster from every point of view, so it wasn't all blamed on me. There you go. So that's just one example. I was using acceptance every day of my life, many times a day. Little things, big things, all the time. And by the way, did it help me to get rid of negative thoughts altogether? No, dramatically reduced them. 24, remember, was the first count made. By the time I'd finished with this, I was probably down to 6 a day or something, and they were quickly cleared up and dropped and let go. Now, I can tell you that if you're going to stay with me and do a training, the rest of the training, which I'm going to tell you about later, you will find out that I replaced this tool about 6 months after I started it with another much more powerful tool that I learned from a guy called Jack Nicklaus. How many people know who Jack Nicklaus was? Very few. World golf champion, 1980s, American. And I'll give you a clue as to what I found out from him and how it totally replaced this process. But nevertheless, I encourage you, even if you're going to come on the training, I encourage you to practice this, because you can't use Jack Nicklaus's approach all the time, only about 90% of the time. So you need to practice this. It's really useful. Okay, so now moving on. This was improving my life dramatically, okay? And the guy who told me about it was very impressed with what we'd come up with. That was helpful for my career. And but there was something going on in my life that this wasn't helping with. And it was quite a significant thing. I was very anxious doing what I'm doing at the moment. How many people would feel anxious standing up here doing what I'm doing at the moment? Put up your hands if you would. It's about 50% of you. I was very anxious speaking to groups. I had to give presentations as part of my job, but I always got very anxious. And this idea of acceptance wasn't helping. And then I met another amazing person, a woman who, quite extraordinary. I wish I had time to tell you all about her. Her life was amazing, but I'll keep it short and tell you that she had the solution to my problem. She gave talks all the time. I met her in Melbourne, and we got into talking about acceptance, because she had something big in her life that she was accepting, but she didn't know about acceptance. I told her about it. She loved it. She called me 2 months later and said she was using it all the time for this huge issue she had in her life. And the subject of talking to groups came up, and I just shared with her, that I was anxious speaking to groups, and immediately she told me the solution. She said, "Graham, you've obviously got very good at this acceptance thing," okay, this was several months in, and she said, "but you haven't thought that you're only applying it to the external world. You haven't thought of applying it to your internal world." She said, "If you're good at accepting what is, how come you're not very good at accepting feeling anxious speaking to groups?" I was astounding what she told me, because she was absolutely right. Any of you who have ever been anxious speaking to groups, and even some of those of you who didn't put up your hand, have probably been anxious speaking to groups sometime back in your life, because most people are. It's the most common anxiety in the world. You may remember that when you're getting up to speak to a group and you're feeling anxious, you're having all these negative thoughts, okay? Thoughts like, "Oh my God, here we go again. I'm feeling anxious and I haven't even got up yet. I wish I could control it. I wish I wasn't feeling anxious. What if it gets worse? That would be terrible. What if it affects my delivery? What if people notice?" So these are the kind of negative thoughts that people have who are anxious speaking to groups. Does that make any sense to those of you who are anxious speaking to groups? Yeah? Okay. And she just said to me, she said, you're really good at accepting what is. How come you're not applying it to your anxiety speaking to groups? And she was so right. It was just amazing. I thought, oh my God, I just never thought of it, how much I was resisting feeling anxious. Does that gel with you? That anyone who's anxious speaking to groups, or anxious about anything, they're hugely resisting having negative thoughts about what they're feeling. So this was my first introduction into something amazing called accepting feelings. Anyway, next time I got up to speak to a group, for a presentation again at work, I noticed myself getting anxious, and I did exactly what she told me to do. I stopped all those negative thoughts. I said, "Look, I'm feeling anxious. That's what is at the moment. Okay, you with me? Accepting what is. And furthermore, I don't have any control over it. This is obviously true. And so what I need to do is just stop thinking negatively about it, be as anxious as I want to be, and I know I can get through it. I've got evidence, for Christ's sake. I've made a dozen presentations before feeling anxious, so I know I can get through it." And what do you think happened to my anxiety when I did that? It diminished dramatically, immediately. What do you think is the main thing people are anxious about when they're anxious speaking to groups? You might think it's what the audience thinks. You might think it's, will they be able to present okay? You might think it's all of these things. No. The main reason people are anxious speaking to groups is because they hate feeling anxious. And as a result of hating feeling anxious, they get anxious about feeling anxious. And what does that do to their anxiety? Just makes it worse. So for the first time, I was having an experience of accepting that it's okay to feel anxious, and it diminished. My first experience of doing something incredibly powerful that's used in the world of psychology now increasingly. and it's about accepting uncomfortable feelings. It is a hugely powerful thing to practice and to learn to do. So, what does it mean to accept an uncomfortable feeling? Be willing to experience it, okay? Accept it. It's okay to have the feeling for now. What are the benefits of accepting uncomfortable feelings? This is every uncomfortable feeling, by the way, not just anxiety, speaking to groups. Recognize it's okay to feel. Does it make sense to you that humans feel and that it's perfectly normal and it's perfectly okay? If we weren't humans and we didn't feel, we'd be robots. So what's wrong with feeling? You know what we think the reason that people grow up resisting feelings like anxiety, depression, feeling cold even, feeling anything uncomfortable, we don't think we were born with that tendency. Animals aren't. We don't think we are either. We think we learnt it as children. We think our parents, and this is not a criticism of any of you who are parents, because you've never heard anyone say this before, we think our parents unwittingly taught us to resist feelings. What does a mother do when a child's crying? Says, come here, don't cry, let me give you a hug, let's make it better. Children are constantly getting messages that it's not okay to feel. That is not helpful. What does the father do when the little boy's getting angry and breaking the furniture? He lets the little boy know definitely, unquestionably, that is not okay. But unless he's been trained as a parent to do this, he won't distinguish between the behavior and the feeling. What modern parents are trained to do is to let the child know it's perfectly okay to be angry. It's just not okay to break the furniture. Does that make sense to you? So that's what we need to train our children. And now children are growing up without this idea that it's not okay to feel uncomfortable, and things are improving as a result. So also, you already know, because I told you, every time you accept a feeling, it diminishes. There is no exception. Different degrees, different feelings, but feelings always diminish. Even feeling cold, by the way. You feel cold, and if you tell yourself and convince yourself and mean it that it's okay to feel cold, you will feel less cold. So that's a little bonus, that it diminishes the feeling. But the big benefit, it enables us to do this powerful, powerful thing called accept the feeling, choose the action. Let me tell you what this is about, using an example. This is incredibly important to know. This, what I'm about to tell you, is something that most psychologists and therapists don't even know, and everyone should know it. This is so valuable. I'm going to talk about the kind of problem that I deal with as a psychologist. There are hundreds of them, but they all fit this example that I'm going to give you. I'm going to take one example. Let's say it's a phobia. Let's say somebody comes to me with a phobia. Let's say it's a dog phobia. What you need to know about this guy with a dog phobia is that it's driven by a belief. Every single feeling and negative thought, pretty well, you ever have is driven by a belief. Most beliefs are unconscious. They reside in our unconscious. What do you think is the unconscious belief driving this guy's dog phobia? It's not difficult. Yeah? Dogs are dangerous. Okay? Dogs are dangerous. That's his unconscious belief. At a conscious level, by the way, he can probably challenge that. After all, he can see everyone else walking past the dog. Does that make sense? So his conscious is a little bit confused. He's saying, why the hell am I getting anxious when I can see the evidence that dogs aren't that dangerous? But his unconscious takes no notice of evidence at all. This is a powerful belief residing in his unconscious. I'm going to tell you later how he got it. But at the moment, I'm just going to tell you, imagine he's walking down the street and he sees a dog coming towards him. Now the belief kicks in. The belief drives a fearful thought. The fearful thought releases adrenaline from his adrenal gland that races around his body. He's now experiencing massive anxiety. So he's feeling fearful and anxious. What do you think he's going to do? He's going to do what he's always done. He's going to get away from the dog. So he crosses the road to avoid the dog. Why? Because he knows that keeps him safe, and because he knows that that will make him feel better. What do you think is happening to his belief while he's crossing the road? It's being reinforced massively. His unconscious thinks in pretty simple ways. It says, well, I'm crossing the road to avoid the dog. There's got to be a reason for that. It's pretty obvious, isn't it, what the reason is? That dog must be dangerous. So by crossing the road to avoid the dog, he's reinforced the belief. The second reinforcement happens when he gets to the other side of the road. He feels better. His fear goes away, his anxiety goes away. What does his unconscious conclude from that? Absolutely. Furthermore, his unconscious will think, over there I was fearful, I was terrified, and I was anxious. Over here I feel fine. Only one possible reason. That dog must be dangerous. He's now doubly reinforced the belief that's driving his phobia. I might ask him, why he thinks he's got his phobia. He'll probably say, I was bitten by a dog when I was 6. And I'll say, that's not the reason at all. The reason you've got your phobia is because for the last 20 years you've been avoiding dogs, and every single time you've done that, you reinforced, yes, it might have been triggered by being bitten by a dog, but given what I've told you, do you think he would have developed a phobia if the dog that bit him had been the family dog? No way. He's developed his phobia by spending 20 years avoiding dogs. Do you think he could have done that if it was the family dog that bit him? No. He would have got over it very quickly. He'd never have developed a phobia. Once I tell him why he's got his phobia, because he's been avoiding dogs, and every single time he's done that, he's reinforced the belief driving his phobia, he now has a realization he never had before. Let me tell you, the process that I've just described to you is universal. Every single time you do what a belief is telling you to do, or what a feeling is telling you to do, and frankly even what a thought is telling you to do, because your thoughts are mainly driven by unconscious beliefs, you are reinforcing, without any question, without exception, the belief that's driving your thought, feeling, or behavior. We go through life doing that all the time. How do people become depressed? Something happens, events, okay, triggered by events in their lives. How do they maintain and build that depression? By withdrawing. What's the belief that drives depression? Life's hopeless. What do you think happens to that belief when they withdraw and isolate, which is what depressed people do? They reinforce it. That's how they become depressed. What sort of belief drives anger? Injustice. What happens to people who lash out a lot, too much, when they're angry? They're reinforcing the belief that there's an injustice and they develop an anger problem. What belief drives a craving? Need. Okay? The body or the brain believes it needs the substance you're craving. You've trained it to do that, by the way. And what do people do when they're having a craving? They consume what they're craving. What do you think that does to the belief? Massively reinforces it. Twice, remember? Okay? First time you consume what you're craving, you reinforce the belief that in the brain that it needs that substance. What was the second reinforcement? You feel better, don't you? The craving goes away. What does the unconscious conclude? I must have needed it, because now I'm not got a craving. People do this all the time. You've been doing it all your life. We're going to start talking about mindset. You have created your mindset primarily through behavior. Yes, the events of your life have triggered these things. Yes, the events of your childhood and your life.
Just a little leg on. Are you guys hot, cold?
Yes, hot.
Hot, generally.
Hot.
Okay. So let's get it back on. Before we had it being cold. So it's
No, it's been hot.
get our man in.
Thank you for the tip. Yeah. You have spent your lives creating your mindset primarily through behavior. You might think it's all sorts of other things. You might think it's childhood events. You might think it's things you've read, people you've heard, experiences generally. Yes, those things have all had an influence on the mindset you've created. But the number one, by a long way, influence on your mindset is your behavior. Let me carry on. So this chart, I'm just going to put it up and then go through it quickly, summarizes what I told you about how most people spend their lives letting their feelings or desires drive their behavior. Okay, so the guy with the dog phobia was letting his feelings his feelings mainly, okay, and his fear, which is more of thought, drive his behavior. He crossed the road. Doing so makes us feel better, all right, all the time. If we do what our mind is telling us to do, or what our feelings are telling us to do, we will generally feel better. There's a big but. It always, without exception, will reinforce the unconscious beliefs driving your feeling, your thoughts, or your behavior. All the time. There is never an exception. So how do we unwind limiting beliefs, of which I've just given you one example? Anything that's limited in your life, how would you unwind it? Let's say you were lacking in confidence. By the way, you created that through your behavior. Does that now make sense to you? If you're lacking in confidence, it's not just what happened in your childhood. It's not the events that have happened in your life. It's how you've responded to those events. I'm not accusing anyone, by the way. Of course, nobody knows this. So even the guy with the dog phobia had no idea. I treated somebody with severe OCD the other day, and one of the worst I've seen. And once she realized that she created her OCD by doing the OCD behavior repeatedly, time and time and time again. And what had happened to the crazy beliefs driving her OCD every time she'd done the OCD behavior? Hugely reinforced the crazy beliefs. That's how she'd come to have them. She was cured in one session, one of the worst OCD cases I've seen. She was very bright, she got it, she went away and started doing the opposite. But she had to know one more thing, okay? So what do you think the guy with the dog phobia is feeling when I tell him he's just got to go away? Oh, by the way, I haven't asked you this. How would you cure the dog phobia? All right? How would you cure it? Stop crossing roads, because that's reinforcing it. Walk past the dog, because that will send the opposite message. Keep walking past dogs. He will undermine the beliefs that are driving his phobia. He probably only has to walk past 20 dogs and he'd be totally cured. Okay, so how's he feeling when I tell him that's what he's got to do? He's feeling pretty anxious. Does that make sense? He's sitting there listening to me and saying, are you kidding? You have no idea what I go through if I have to walk past a dog. So his anxiety is already building. What do you think his anxiety will be like when he walks past his first dog? Massive. So what do I need to do to help him deal with the anxiety? I need to convince him that it's okay to feel anxious. Let me give you a couple of facts about feelings to convince you that every feeling is okay. First thing I want to tell you is that nobody's ever been harmed by a feeling. No feeling has ever harmed you. Anxiety, depression, feeling cold. Even feeling cold is 100% harmless. That might surprise you. The source of the feeling is being cold. Does that make sense? Being cold can kill you. But the feeling is just a messaging system from the body to the brain. It is totally harmless. No feeling has ever harmed you. The second thing I can tell you about feelings is that they're all bearable. There's only one exception: extreme pain, probably under torture. That is not bearable. The mind and body can't cope with that level of pain. But anything less than that, you can bear it. So here's 3 questions that we give people to be able to cope with feeling uncomfortable. Is this feeling harming me? What's the answer? No. Can I bear it? What's the answer? Yes. So if it's not harming me and I can bear it, what exactly is the problem with having this feeling? It's uncomfortable. That's the only problem. Does that make sense? Now this guy with the dog phobia will say, oh, come on, you've got to be kidding. You don't know what I go through. And I said, you tell me what you're going through. My heart's racing, my breathing's going crazy, I've got all these trembling going through my body. I said, that's interesting. I said, have you ever run for a bus? Does that make sense? Was his heart beating? Was it going crazy? Was his breathing going crazy? He didn't have all the feelings of anxiety, but he had most of them. And he said, he'll think about it, and he said, well, I guess you're right, but there wasn't a dog there. So the feelings are fine, okay? So you can learn to accept any feeling with those 3 questions. I give people exercises. Here's a simple one: get in the shower, turn the hot water down a bit, make yourself a bit uncomfortable. You don't have to have a cold shower. Turn the hot water down a bit until you're uncomfortable. Ask the 3 questions. Does that make sense? Is this discomfort harming me? Of course it isn't. Can I bear it? Yes, I can. So why can't I let it be there for 10 seconds? Somebody does that exercise, they've had their first experience in their life of voluntarily feeling uncomfortable and doing nothing about it for 10 seconds. All he's got to do is practice those questions, feeling uncomfortable in all sorts of ways, running up escalators, whatever. And he'll get it, then he'll apply it to his anxiety, and he'll be fine, and he'll walk past the dog, and he's cured very quickly. So to unwind limiting beliefs, except for now in the uncomfortable feeling or unproductive zone, repeatedly do the opposite. The cure for any mind-based problem, there is only 1 or 2 exceptions out of dozens and dozens of mind-based problems that I deal with, is that. The cure for any mind-based problem, with a couple of exceptions, is learn to accept the feeling, any feelings that are involved, and do the opposite of what the feeling is telling you to do. How did we cure the OCD person? What happens when an OCD person doesn't do the behavior? What do you think they feel when they don't do the OCD behavior? Anxious, dramatically anxious. She needed to get that it's okay to be anxious. She got it. She did the shower exercise. She ran up escalators around the block. She practiced and practiced and practiced accepting discomfort, and then applied it to her OCD. It only took her a few days. Applied it to her OCD. She was cured in 2 weeks. Okay, that's true of every mind-based problem, by the way. You cure it by learning to accept any feelings that are going on and doing the opposite of what the feeling is telling you to do. Okay, that brings us on to what I want to tell you about developing a powerful mindset. You know all the tools. How do you think, from what I've told you, what do you think you would need to do to become incredibly confident, huge self-beliefs, very powerful? What do you think, now that you know that mindset is driven primarily by behavior, what do you think you would need to do to develop a powerful mindset? Anyone? I'm sorry, change your behavior to what? What would you need to change your behavior to?
Act powerful.
You would need to behave in ways that are more powerful than the ways you currently behave. You would need to behave in ways that take you out of your comfort zone. What do you think you'd be feeling if you behaved in ways that are hugely more powerful than you're comfortable with? What would you be feeling? You'd be feeling anxious, maybe fearful. Okay, you'd be feeling pretty uncomfortable. Does that make sense? What would you do with that discomfort? You accept it. Well, the reason we use the word acceptance for feelings, by the way, as opposed to acceptance, is because feelings are an example. Remember the very first chart? Accept the things you can't change. We do not have control over our feelings. We do not magically have a button to switch off feelings. So it's something that for now you can't change. That's why we use the word accept. Does that make sense? Let it be. That's what acceptance means. So you'd accept the feeling. Remember the 3 questions. Yeah? Use it all the time. So now that I'd figured all this out, and by the way, this guy that taught me to accept what is, he knew how to become powerful. He'd used it himself. He didn't know about the psychology that I've described to you. He didn't know about the reinforcement thing. He didn't know so much about accepting feelings, but he did know that the way he made himself massively powerful and massively strong and successful, he was incredibly successful, was from a young age, he had understood he needed to behave way outside his comfort zone and do it again and again and again. Most people, by the way, struggle a bit with speaking to large groups. Do you know of an organization where you could go and practice being uncomfortable if you're slightly anxious speaking to groups? Toastmasters. I suggest that if any of you, even if you're comfortable speaking to groups, Toastmasters is an amazing organization to give you an opportunity to behave outside your comfort zone. In other words, even if you don't mind speaking to groups, you can do amazing things in Toastmasters in front of an audience of maybe 30 people, way beyond what makes you comfortable. It will massively increase your confidence. It will massively increase your self-belief and your mindset. There are many ways in which you can act outside your comfort zone. If you stay with me and come to another of my trainings, actually not the next one, but the one after, you will find out what I did to hugely increase my confidence and change my mindset massively. I'm going to quickly, okay, here's what I've just told you. Oh no, I'm sorry, those are the questions. I'm not going to go through again. Accept the feeling, choose the action. Those are some examples that I've already been to of how we cure mind-based problems. Developing a powerful mindset. As with unwinding limiting beliefs, behavior is the key. So few people know this. There are lots of trainers out there who will tell you, well, no, it's not. It's things like affirmations and visualizations. It's things about directly trying to influence your brain. Let me tell you, there's masses of research on this, and things like that are helpful. I don't want to knock it. They're helpful, things like affirmations and visualizations, but they are nothing like as powerful as behavior. The unconscious mind responds to behavior, not evidence, not reading books, not thinking. It responds to behavior hugely. So if you want to develop a powerful mindset, get powerful. By the way, there's an example of this in a TED talk by Amy Cuddy. You should watch it. It's only 15 minutes. Amy Cuddy. Hugely influential TED talk. Okay, so self-help can help, that's the point I just made, but action is the key. Acting powerfully while accepting the feelings that will generate. Does that make sense? It will make you uncomfortable to act outside your comfort zone. You need to train yourself to accept those feelings. Once again, accept the feeling, choose the action is the key tool. One, to unwind negative mindsets. Does it make sense to you that all those mind-based problems that I talked to are just negative mindsets? In other words, what is mindset basically? It's a negative belief, negative self-belief. So all those psychological problems that I quickly went through are all examples of negative mindset. We cure them to accept the feeling, choose the action. If you don't have negative mindset problems and you want to create a powerful mindset, it's the same tool. Let me quickly go through. I'm not going to take you through the summary because you've heard me say everything. If you're following this, oh, by the way, if you want these charts, I'll tell you how to get them a bit later. You can get all the charts. This is just a daily reflection. The summary that I've just shown you, I'm encouraging you to look through it maybe once a day. Think about whether you've been following it in your day, in your life, and use the tools that I've given you. I'm not going to go through this. This is Jack Nicklaus, something about Jack Nicklaus. I'm just going to quickly go through the course that I run. This is the first of 5 trainings of this length. Okay? What I've given you is a taster of what I did to massively change my life. The other 4 trainings of equal length to this one, actually they're 1.5 hours, this one was only an hour. 1.5 hours, they all happen all on the web. They take you through everything that I did to massively change my life and that I've trained tens of thousands of people to do, and every single one of them has massively changed their life as a result of this training. I can guarantee you. Okay, so what does it do? Exceptional resilience, power, confidence, success, highly effective tools to deal with challenges in relationships. Let's skip, oops, I'm going to show you a few testimonials. This was a guy that I trained who said the most succinct, useful and effective training I've ever encountered. He was the CEO of Northern Rock at the time. This training enabled him to turn Northern Rock around. He then became CEO of 3i and then an advisor to David Cameron as a result of the training, and he attributed it all to the training. Some of the outcomes, I'm not going to go through that because that's more detail of what I've ever said. There's another testimonial by a guy who's an entrepreneur. I'll let you read it. I'm racing on now to finish on time. Okay, the cost of this training initially it is actually free. The whole training is free, just like tonight is. Well, it hasn't been free to you. My God, you paid £10 for this. Normally, this training that you've had, I do on the web, and it's actually free for everyone. So sorry. Nothing against Funzing, okay? Because these guys didn't know that, and I kept quiet. Okay. What you heard today is free on the web, and it's spread over an hour and a half. But then what you do is the full course is free if you want to do it, and I would strongly advise you to. This is massively life-changing stuff, and everyone has said the same. Their lives have changed dramatically. There is an upfront investment. Strictly it's $4.95, but that's discounted to $2.95 if you sign up for it within 3 days. The reason for that incentive to sign up for it quickly is there's a lot of things we need to do with you before the next webinar. The next webinar, actually the first webinar is tomorrow. Okay, so if you hadn't come tonight, you could have done it free on the web tomorrow. But never mind. The next webinar is tomorrow. If you want to see this again, by the way, you can watch tomorrow. There's lots of sheets around here somewhere. Oh, sorry, they're here, which I'll pass around. Let's do that now. Pass these around.